Good morning, everybody. It is Thursday. Da-da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. Coffee in hand. Ooh. Chilly, cold, unambiguously so. And we are starting off our morning with the inimitable Phumi Mashiko, who's in the studio in Johannesburg. We've also got
I love that.
Ryan,
And then
the producer. We got the whole team getting things together on the back end, making sure the show gets to you this morning. Pums, you can tell winter's here, huh?
Baba, this morning when I left my house, I was like, yeah, there's a bite in the air.
Yes. But we're
I
not going
see
to talk
you are
about
also
that.
wearing a hoodie. I see you are
Oh,
also
yeah.
wearing a hoodie. You and
No.
I.
I've got the winter stuff out already. I'm not messing around. I'm
It's
not
one
going to
of
be
the
caught.
things I did over the Easter weekend was take out the blankets. I even made a fire.
Already. I make a
Listen,
rule.
it was freezing and raining out here in Joburg.
I know, but I make a rule. No fires, no electric blankets, no winter soups, none of that shit until May the 1st.
Hey, Baba. Yeah. You see, sneezing and all. La 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 la.
No, none of that.
It
We won't have
but
any of that until May the 1st, Pums. No ways.
it
You're cheating.
it was raining cats and dogs out here. When was it? On Sunday, I think. Sunday or Sunday night into Monday. But also, Bebe, I have had almost 30 hours of no electricity.
Oh, fuck. Ugh. Okay,
So I am you and your May one Dontoni. It was a little bit. I needed all of the hug. You know, like a nice good fire is like a hug on the inside.
I hear you. Okay, so you've broken the rule, but it's fine. I will forgive you this time.
But tell me, but of course you were, and I know you spoke a little bit about it, and you were in the heat, in the bosom of the kingdom of the Zulu, which always has good weather.
You know what? It was it was quite warm on Saturday afternoon into the evening in KwaMashu, and then later on in Umhlanga as well, because I went back for supper there, and it was raining there too. Hey, not
Really?
hard. It was like drizzle, but there was rain. It was wet.
But it's not cold rain. It ain't cold rain.
No. It always feels like you are in a reasonably lukewarm shower when you're in KZN and it rains. Always.
So, I do need to know one thing, because I was looking on your socials and I did have a small conversation with Rena, and I understand that you were doing all the translating. Very proud of you. All your Zulu.
For me, it suddenly came back to me, hey, and she, Rena was like, "How do you know this stuff?" And I was like, "I'm not even sure if I do." But you know, it's like little words start to pop back out at you, and I mean, I did. They taught us Zulu in primary school for the first 3 years that I was at that school in KZN, and then after that, they were supposed to teach us Northern Sotho, but they never did. So I remember little things like, you know, obviously the greetings and, you know, asking people how they are, because they always teach you that in every language when you start off. And
Thank goodness.
And then some words were like popping out at me from all the other speeches and the people who were on stage, because it was all in Zulu. There was no like English subtitles or anything. So, you know, like it was me and Rena, and there was no one else who needed to have English subtitles. So I understood.
But it's also Zulu. You know, this is what
Yeah,
I absolutely love about being in KZN, is people just speak Zulu. The black, white, Indian, everybody just speaks Zulu.
does. And well, it's the first language of that province. So anyway, I was picking up like little words like, obvious ones, sebenza and funda and namhlanje and things like that. So it was all kind of coming back to me in waves. And I honestly, I joked with, I think it was with Lebang on Monday. I said to her, if I just sat there for another 4 or 5 hours, I promise you I'd be picking. I mean, you've been in Germany with me as well, and you speak German. I've never learnt German in any formal setting, but I read everything, right? So, and I listen, and I mean, languages are one of my favorite things. So, if you give me enough time, I can start to pick it up, and then the pronunciation starts to come, and then I start figuring out the grammar quite badly. But I mean, I can put a sentence together eventually. So,
and
I reckon
and you
if
can
you drop
also
me,
sing, which
yeah, what
which
else?
in my mind is always that's one of the magic tricks about
Mm,
language and learning language, because it's in listening. It's in the listening
mm.
that you're able to, because language,
And,
whatever language it is also about emotion. You know, as people say the words and you see the
mm,
action, it's also just hearing beyond what's coming off the tongue. In Tswana, they say
well,
you gotta
yes,
hear what's in the root of the tongue.
and you mentioned singing, but singing also helps because you can reproduce the sounds properly because you can hear the tones, right? And that's actually kind of helpful in any language. I mean, some languages are much more musical than others. Like I did find it, I was catching on to Zulu a lot quicker than I did, for example, German. But it's also interesting that you grow up with this stuff, and then it sits in the back of your mind forever, and then suddenly it comes back to you. And I found the weirdest thing happened for me. You talk about singing. So the guy who was the program director for this thing was a former MK vet called Muntu. I've got his book here, which I've actually got for Muzi. Muntu Nkumalo. And
Mhm.
he he led the national anthem at the start of proceedings, right? But because he's an MK vet, he knows the old version. So I don't know how the Wozamoya, 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 Oi. That the original one that nobody knows anymore?
The
Because
prayer.
immediately right. So people go from Kwazulu, Africa, the Passapat, then they're going to Malo Paganisu, Pondolwayo, Izamitanda, Zoyetu, and I'm singing along with all of this because this is obvious. And then he starts with the Zulu prayer part of it. And I'm like, shit, how do I know this? It just comes back to you. It's bloody amazing.
I think people have forgotten that our national anthem is actually a prayer.
No, I mean, it says so in
And
the opening line. God save Africa.
and what a magnificent prayer that Enoch Sontonga wrote,
Mm.
which, Africa still needs.
So it was a lot of fun, and I did something similar yesterday on the other side of the Anglo-Zulu Wars of 1837 to 1840. My mother put this thing in my diary months ago, and she's like, "You have to keep Wednesday afternoon open." So I still, oh, all right. Um, so he's a distant relative of ours, but more importantly, he's a four greats grandson of Andries Pretorius, is the guy who won the Battle of Blood River. So I went straight from Pixlika Isagaseme to Andries Pretorius yesterday. We went out to his
Whoa.
farm. Yeah. And he has a daughter who has just made this awesome hot sauce, which I mean, I love a hot sauce, right? You don't have to talk me into that. But like out of chili, no, it's like a chili oil with chili flakes and things. And she's called it Squita Peturs. And Squita Peturs, he was my great grandmother's brother. He was an actual guy. He was like during the Anglo-Boer War, he was in charge of the artillery and the cannons against the English. So
Yeah.
he got this name Squita Peturs because he would set up the cannons and he always got his target. He was like a fantastic marksman, whether it was a cannon or a rifle or a pistol or whatever. This guy was just an absolute ammunition monster, right? So she's made this incredible hot sauce, which she's named after him. And we went out to the farm and, they told us the whole story of the farm and all of this stuff. And it was really bloody interesting. So as if that isn't enough, I'm doing a trifecta. You can tell I'm becoming an old man because this is the stuff that gives me such joy, right? It's like history. And I'm going to the Zulu battlefields in what,
Yes.
1 week, a week and a half's time? Yeah, next weekend. So I'm
Yes.
like, this April is gonna be the best month ever. If you didn't hear my interview with Simon Montefiore yesterday, you know that I'm this deep in history at the moment, which is making me so happy. Anyway, Saturday, I'm going to a lecture somewhere in the Northwest on my great-grandfather, Gustav Preller, who wrote the first history of Mzilikazi and Lobengula, and two other chiefs. He was obviously the first white guy who'd ever written these histories, but he also wrote like 60 other books, and he was a proper historian. I mean, I could only wish to be as
Wow.
meticulous a historian as he was. So I'm really filling up my history tank this week. So I'll let you know how that goes
Wow.
after next week. But yeah, a really interesting experience. And again, like maybe I'm just making up for how my brother and sister don't give a shit about this stuff. They really don't. They don't love history. They don't care about it. They're not interested in it. And maybe I'm also making up for all those other people who don't care about history in the world. But I'll be
Or
damned.
or
I'll
maybe
take
or maybe it is just great joy that it fills you with. Maybe
it.
it is just the joy that it fills you with. You know what? There's too much nonsense in the world. There's too much Kuningi nonsense in the world. And this
Well,
kind of joy, you must take it where you get
I'm
it, my
I'm
friend.
taking it. But, Mongezi says it is Kuningi Thursday yet again, and it keeps getting Kuningier, and my God, okay, I got home. I normally don't do this. I was watching TV, and holy shit, did I catch the right day of television. I watched Glynnis Breytenbach.
The parliamentary committee.
Oh my God. I mean, listen, I've met Glynnis Breytenbach before, and I can't say that I know her well, but Jesus, she's a tour de force, hey? I mean,
But yesterday, I think a lot of the Twitterati, of the Twitter masses, were meeting Advocate Glynis for the first time. So
Mhm.
a lot of people have never heard or seen, because y'all don't know that before she was an MP, she was actually in the NPA,
NPA? Oh.
and,
So
and she was no nonsense even then.
listen to this quickly. Here's the clip, which, I mean, there's so many clips we could play for you, and we're probably going to get banned from YouTube, or they're going to like strike us on this. They always do. I don't know how there are other shows that I've watched on YouTube where they play all this stuff and they don't get into trouble, but clearly we don't have the right connections there. I don't know what it is. Here's Glynnis Breytenbach talking. And by the way, the reason they called the parliamentary committee together was to try and find out how Thabo Bester got out. Lebang says in the comments, morning, Thabo Bester and Nandipha just arrived in South Africa. It's about to
It,
shake.
they left around like 6 p.m. yesterday from Tanzania on a charter flight. We're supposed to, when I saw this morning that they actually had landed around 4 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the media was congregating, arriving through Lanseria.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm going to be watching
I
because
don't
now
have
I'm.
a TV here. All I have is producer Ryan's like Apple TV. I'm looking at the globe. I asked if he could turn on ENCA. And he was like,
Well, actually. Um, Yeah, so let me play this clip of Glynnis quickly because I want to get into this. She was really on fire yesterday. I mean, all the other MPs just looked like they were half asleep, because this is what she's good at, right? Like this is her thing. It's like if you
mm.
see a carpenter making magnificent things out of wood, or if you see a writer busy like hammering out the most beautiful script, and you only know when it's done, but with her, you can watch her doing it.
Do you do lifestyle audits on your employees? I don't know, pick a straw, whichever one of you is going to answer.
Honourable Member, we don't do any life audit.
Why not?
We really don't have any reason to do the lifestyle audit on our employees.
I beg your pardon? Do you want to repeat that?
Yes, we don't see any reason to do the lifestyle audits on our employees.
You employ people to look after hardened criminals. Your facility looks after, it's a maximum security facility, right? So we're not looking at shoplifters. And you don't think it's necessary to do lifestyle audits on your staff?
Honourable
Who
Member.
I'm busy.
Sorry.
And when I'm done, you'll have an opportunity. And don't make the mistake of interrupting me again. And you don't think it's necessary to do lifestyle audits on people who look after criminals like that, who have access to money, who are known for bribery and corruption? Are you saying your staff is above that? And if you are saying so, on what basis? Pick a straw.
She was hectic.
Oh wow. Mm-mm-mm.
She was hectic, and that isn't even the worst of it. But I did think that her lifestyle audit question was a little disingenuous. We wish we could have lifestyle audits on politicians.
No, we should. I mean, what I saw, I didn't see that part live. I saw her with these two. There was their legal advisor from G4S, and she just went straight for the kill. She's like, okay, so who's the holding company for G4S? The guy says the name of the company. She's like, and is this company involved? He goes, yeah. She goes, this company? He goes, yeah. She goes, and isn't the big shareholder this guy? She mentions a name. The guy goes, yes, I believe so. She goes, isn't he also on the ANC's Progressive Business Council? He goes, yeah. She says, oh, and a major donor there too. He goes, I'm not sure. She goes, I can help you with that. He is. Yes. This guy, I mean, and then she says to him, you're a lawyer. You're meant to know what this one term is. The guy's just like, he's this young lawyer who clearly is just completely out of his depth. I mean, you know, it's fine for them to be going after G4S like this, because I do think G4S should stand up and account for itself. They've been given a task. But I think the people who should be held responsible actually are correctional services. They employed these people. They're the ones who couldn't discharge their duties themselves. We pay for them already. We pay for correctional services. There's a huge chunk of the budget that goes to making sure that those fucking idiots in correctional services get money to do their job. So what do? They hire subcontractors. Those subcontractors may be a private company that may be more or less competent than them, but it is their job to make sure that G4S does their job. Where's the oversight?
And there's a number of things that are converging around this G4S conversation, and they're not the only ones. I think there are 3 private prisons. They've been in the system for a good 10 years, and this parliamentary committee for the past 10 years haven't had these tough conversations, which they should have had, they should have had 10 years ago when the decision was being made, when these private companies got the tenders, when they 800 million rand, 800 million rand a year is what they get paid, G4S in particular, for that Mangaung facility.
Huge amount of money.
Like,
and now we find out
the parliamentary committee, and had it not been for Thabo Bester needing avocados and some starstruck Twitterati taking a picture and we would not be having this conversation.
But it does show you what can be done when Parliament feels media pressure. Like they can quickly call together a parliamentary committee, start looking into things. I mean, they did this in a period of a couple of days. So it shows they can shake themselves into action. First of all. Second of all, it shows you that competent members of Parliament, like Glynnis Breytenbach, are able to zero in on important stuff. What she is exposing here is not so much just the incompetence of G4S security or how much they're being paid, but how they got the contract, because clearly the major shareholder is a big ANC donor. And I think if this isn't a clear case of corruption, then I don't know what it is. How did these tenders get awarded if they've got all these processes in place and this guy gets it because he's an ANC donor? I mean, come on.
The point being, though, which is irritating for me, is that 12 years ago, 10 years ago, all of these things are what should have been ventilated then, because that is what the parliamentary committees are supposed to be. That's their oversight role. But now, because we're all watching, and this is again, this is how important we are and making a noise uh, as the civic society, how important it is. Look at what's happened because of the outcry. Look at what's happened. Now, suddenly,
Well,
the
we should be
conversations are being had
we should be making noise about all the things, not just
about everything.
the most sensational stories like the Thabo Bester story. Right.
Absolutely.
You've been saying this for a long time. It's not as if this is novel to you.
But you see how our loud voices can be.
No.
But it is Kuningi, and here we go. So, and now, I don't know if now the ride really begins, because May Folk Maradis, all of the Thabo Bester stuff is definitely Kuningi, yeah,
Mhm.
and I think it's about to get Kuningiest.
Oh, we even have a picture now. Someone posted
I love
this
it.
and sent it to
I sent it to Dory to say, Trappe van Fakeleken. There you go.
Kuningi, and it keeps on getting Kuningier. Absolutely. Well, I mean, so Glynnis Breytenbach is one thing because, again, it's people that get people's attention. It's not stories, really. And they found these two people in Tanzania. Now, the dad is involved too, Nandipha's dad.
Winner.
So we're going to find out more.
65-year-old.
Yeah, we're going to find out more. And I also think another interesting...
28-year-old. Oh, yeah, say? I'm saying a 28-year-old was arrested yesterday driving Nandipha's Porsche SUV. Like, what? Like, how do you get your 65-year-old dad involved in such madness?
Well, because there's such greed. And there are so many people on the take in illicit ways in South Africa that we're now going to have to find each of these people and expose them. For the last 10 years, they've got off scot-free. I don't know whether the NPA has made any prosecutions whatsoever over the last 10 years. So in other words, this has been the Wild West. There's no sheriff in town. Do whatever you want. Steal as much as you want. If you're very unfortunate, we'll catch you, especially if you're the sort of person who follows the rules mostly. But if you're the kind of person who doesn't follow the rules at all, it's been like a free, all-you-can-eat buffet. And that's what's been happening. So now we got to go after people. And this is hopefully an example of how the criminal justice system will be tested. And let's hope it doesn't come up really, really wanting, because otherwise it's going to encourage more crime.
Hey.
Hey is right.
Hey,
so what I wanted to say is the other big interview I saw yesterday was of Elon Musk and a BBC journalist. And, I'm so tired of people using words without actually explaining what they mean. And it's a thing that goes on, especially with journalists. So, you hear a lot of people in the media saying, there has been an explosion of hate on social media, or there's been an outpouring of hate in response to, this transgender athlete getting a sponsorship or whatever it might be. Hate, hate, hate. They use this word all the time. And it's been used as a word to kind of activate their point of view and win people over to their side. Because who's going to go, oh, an explosion of hate, that's good. That's terrific. We want more hate. No one's going to say that. So it's like such an obvious polarizing word. It doesn't allow for any discussion around the subject. And yesterday,
I did not see that interview.
Elon Musk. Well, I'll see if I can find a clip of that for you. I might have it on my phone, in which case I'll just try and put it on the show quickly. But Elon Musk was sitting with this BBC journalist. And in fact, I do. I've got the audio only. You don't mind that, right?
No.
That's good enough. So he's sitting with this journalist from the BBC. I'll give you a quick overview of this. And while they're talking, Elon, comes to the point where he says to this guy, so since I've been in charge, have you seen an explosion of hate? Because this guy's kind of insinuating that there's more hate speech on Twitter since Elon's taken over than there was before. And he says, can you give me an example? And the guy goes, obviously can't. So Elon says, well, is there just one example of hate? I need to know what you're talking about so that we can act upon it and try and deal with it. No, I can't. Elon says, but if you say there's hate, we're like, well, how do you define hate? The guy goes, well, there are a few slightly sexist or slightly racist comments. So he goes, so you call slightly racist or slightly sexist things hate? The guy's like, yeah. He goes, so in other words, like a chauvinist joke is hate? Or someone kidding about their wife having a bad month or whatever, or bad time of the month, that's hate? The guy's like, well, I don't have specific examples. So he said, well, I'm afraid you got to have, because I've got to adjudicate on specific examples. Anyway, Elon turns it into a very interesting situation where he says to the BBC guy, so, because the BBC guy has now changed into misinformation, especially around COVID. BBC guy is like, so how do you feel about misinformation on Twitter? So he goes, well, how do you feel about misinformation on the BBC? Guy goes, well, I'm not really here to speak for the BBC. So Elon goes, well, we're having an interview about it now. So you ask me questions, I ask you questions. You're asking me about Twitter. COVID's not a thing anymore. You guys lied about masks. You lied about lockdowns. You were in cooperation with the British government. You did exactly what they told you to do. You were feeding people with nonsense. This guy's like sitting there with a mouthful of teeth, the interviewer, totally out of his depth. You see, he thought he was going to have an easy ride with Elon, just like those people in Parliament thought they were going to have an easy ride with Glynnis. I think we've got to start asking people uncomfortable and uneasy questions and see how good they actually are at their job. And it was a masterclass, and again, revealing that these very, very stupid journalists who are following a narrative, they buy into whatever narrative they're sold. They are complete acolytes to whatever side of the political spectrum they're on. The minute you scratch just a little bit at the surface, they fall apart.
I think, there are also two things at play. One being bad training, the other being not prepared, right? Because you know as much as I know, you don't ask a question as a journalist to which you don't know the answer. You just don't ask the question.
That's fine if you're setting someone up, which a lot of journalists think they can do. But if you genuinely don't know the answer to a question and you're asking it because you're absolutely curious about it and you think many other people will need to know the answer, that's a different story.
Which is about curiosity, right? So you walk in with an open mind.
I don't think this guy's unprepared. Listen to this. He's not unprepared. He's just a perfect example of one of these journalists who's got a political agenda. Listen to this.
You said you've seen more hateful content, but you can't name a single example, not even one.
I'm not sure I've used that feed for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and
how did you see the hateful content?
Because I've been using it. I've been using Twitter since you've taken it over for the last 6 months.
Okay, so then you must have at some point seen that for you hateful content. I'm asking for one example.
Right.
You can't give a single one.
And I'm saying
I say, sir, that you don't know what you're talking about.
Really?
Yes, because you can't give me a single example of hateful content, not even one tweet, and yet you claimed that the hateful content was high.
Well,
that's false.
No, what I claimed.
No.
What I claimed was there are many organisations that say that kind of information is on the rise. Now, whether it has on my feed or not, I mean, right, and if you look at something like the Strategic Dialogue Institute in the UK, they will say that. So
look, people will say all sorts of nonsense. I'm literally asking for a single example, and you can't name one.
Right, and
there we go.
See, so ill-prepared. If that is the conversation he wanted to have and he wanted to nail him on it, he needed to bring his facts. He needed to bring these are the 20 comments. These are the various research institutions who've claimed this, and this is why they're claiming it. He was ill-prepared.
These are supposedly the best journalists in the world. I mean, the BBC prides itself on not, picking up slops. And if this is the best, they're in a lot of trouble, because you go into an interview with the smartest man in the world, certainly in business terms or in terms of innovative business, thinking about the future, being clear on what his task is. This guy's no slouch. This journalist is a moron. You put someone smarter than that in. That's what you do. And if they don't have
Charlie
smarter people,
Rose.
well, hasn't he been accused of being I don't know, some kind of creep or pervert or something? I don't think he's available
Hey,
anymore.
as we wake up in a world where the Dalai Lama is being
He's
outed as a pedophile.
Well, he is. Clearly, I'm not saying he is a pedophile, but he's definitely been outed as some kind of creep. Who asks a tiny little boy to suck your tongue? What kind of sick shit is that? I don't get that at all. And by the way, there's this outrageous picture that is doing the rounds, which I don't know if you've seen this, but this just shows how wild this whole Dalai Lama story is. Apparently, Joe Biden flew into Tibet just for this. Look at this picture.
Aye, man.
But just my
That is not what I was expecting to see.
my last word on this Elon Musk interview, because it's still going to get, it's going to have legs for a couple of weeks. I think people are going to be unpicking this for some time. This whole rise in hate narrative is just absolutely unfounded. There is no statistical data to back this up. And this is the point that Musk was making. When people claim there's hate like this journalist did, it's on a subjective basis, and it's usually because that's what they want the outcome to be. They want to talk about hate because otherwise they don't really have an enemy to discuss. Human beings are getting on better than we've ever got on. There are more of us than there ever have been. There is more information. There is more tolerance. There is more diversity. There is all of that stuff. And although, of course, there are always going to be reasons for people to find conflict with each other, it is inarguable to posit anything but the fact that human beings are getting on much more harmoniously than we've ever done before. So these people who keep on telling you that there's a rise in hate, I need to know where they're getting this information, and you should question it too, because it seems to me that the hate is being raised by people who want you to think it's going up. And I want to know why. I want to know what that's all about.
So I don't know if I have seen a rise in hate, but what I have seen a rise in is people taking joy and glee from the misery of others.
How so?
So what I have been observing, and particularly around this kind of Thabo Bester thing, right, is how people are tweeting about it is this kind of, well, you see people looking all rich on Twitter or Instagram, and they all just thieves and thugs. Look at that. She was a doctor and she couldn't keep it together. All of that kind of stuff. And so I've been wondering is it making ourselves feel better by kind of being joyful in the misery of others is what I've been watching and asking myself about all of the various tweets. I think one of the people that I saw taking a lot of like strays over this past couple of days is Ridi, because Ridi's Tlabi's husband is a doctor, and he and I think two others, so they 4 couples is what Ridi was posting about, were all friends. So the guys were all doctors. Nandi is the only the woman doctor in the group, and they were all friends like couples can be. And so there were lots of pictures of Ridi and Dr. Nandi, and also with the rest of the crowd, the rest of the friends. And of course, Ridi has a lot of hate. A lot of people who hate Ridi because they feel that Ridi, particularly around Jacob Zuma, was paid to target Jacob Zuma. And so she took a lot of strays, right? And I was like, and she was like, yeah, we're friends. You know, we were friends. We were a group of friends. And some relationships, when they don't last, the friendships don't last, you know. And when Dr. Nandi and her husband, Mkuseli, I think his name is, when they broke up, she kind of got out of the group and we've lost touch with her since 2019 or whatever it is. But oh my God, the kind of hate that was spewed towards her. Oh, what kind of journalist? You couldn't see this coming. Of course, now you're sanitizing your image. You're always been a terrible person. You can judge a person by the friends they keep. And I was just like, whoa,
You know,
poor Rita.
look, yeah, but let me just go back to your original point. Like, there's a huge distinction in my mind between just people who are just hateful and, you know, more and more, I think those people exist and they are obvious to find because they express their hate. Otherwise, you know, an unexpressed hate is just a thought, and you can't nail people for their thoughts,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right? So what you're talking about with Nandipha and all of this stuff is there's always a contingent of people, particularly on Twitter, who are bitter and resentful. And bitterness and resentfulness are not the same as hatred. Those people are, while they may be mixed up in their heads, it's clear that, you know, there's a bit of Schadenfreude in this. You know, they're taking pleasure in other people's misery because their own lives are shit. So the only way they can feel better is by dragging other people down. That's why Twitter is the way it is. You know, we've seen countless people being brought down by, you know, nameless, faceless, moneyless people on Twitter. And that's always going to be the case. Bitter, resentful people, you know, beget this kind of public attention. But with regard to Reedy, I mean, there's another thing that bothers me about this. And you know, Reedy and I have known each other a while. I wouldn't ever claim to be her friend, but people are always looking for like something to pull her down with. Because again, she's largely been a woman of her own agency. And she's stood her ground against some pretty big political opponents. And she stood her ground against some pretty dangerous people too. And you know, she's gone over to the UK, and a lot of people have a problem with that too. They're like, oh well, you know, she was all pro
Listen.
ANC, and then she went over to stay in the UK. Let me tell you this: it is so obvious and glaringly obvious to me that the people who don't like the fact that there's somebody who has an opinion and sticks to it and is not swayed by public opinion, that person is dangerous. There are lots of people who just want to control these sorts of people. Now, Reedy is not my cup of tea on every front. I mean, there's obviously stuff that she and I would disagree upon. That's not important. What I respect about her is she takes on things like the situation of the woman who Jacob Zuma was accused of raping. And she made a huge story of this. And she went and wrote the book about this, which was a brave thing to do. No one else was going to do it. Reedy's the only one who had the gumption to go and do it. Now, you may be on the Jacob Zuma side of things, but you have to admire the fact that this fearless journalist, and that's what she is, went and did this. She also, for years, fielded calls from people who couldn't stand her. She spoke to her opponents on her show. She is by no means everybody's cup of tea, but she is absolutely a woman of her own agency. And I respect that.
Listen, and she does a hell of a job at like slugging back even to the Twitterati. When people tweet hate at her, she knows how to bet the bullshit.
Some lowlife who hasn't done anything in their life goes around on Twitter saying, there's a picture of Reedy with Dr. Nandipha 5 years ago. And they think gotcha. I got you, Reedy Flabby. We're going to pull you down, bitch. And then she replies like, yes, my husband was friends with this. How do I know that someone in my circle, you know, murderers aren't always murderers. They aren't always, no, they aren't.
I don't know what they look like. Anybody could be a murderer.
Your next door neighbor could be a murderer right now. And then what? You find yourself being interviewed on the news in 5 days' time when he's killed his wife. And you're like, well, they were always very nice neighbors to me. People are like, what is that person, stupid?
They were quiet.
I don't know the situation. This is the first I've heard about this Reedy story, what you told me now. But I cannot believe that people are so desperate to pull this woman down that this is what they do. It's like they seize upon Stormy Daniels to pull Donald Trump down. I mean, really and truly, if that's all you've got, you haven't got a lot. If Stormy Daniels is the reason that you've decided to go after Donald Trump, I'm talking here about the Attorney General of New York, good for you. It's going to go horribly wrong for you. You're going to be the victim of unforeseen consequences. You're going to make him bigger than you should, just like the people who criticize Reedy do. You make her more relevant than ever, and you make yourself seem really small. So good luck. And listen, again, I have to say, and this is a valid thing to bring in here with Elon and Reedy and everything else, criticizing people is not the same as hate. Criticizing behavior, criticizing institutions, criticizing politics, criticizing someone's response to an answer to a question is not hate. All right? It's criticism. And it is absolutely critical. That's why they're the same words. Anyway, I've shot my bolt on that one. Anything else?
Oh, the hate narrative. Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
What's in the news? Do we have news headlines? What's in the news today?
Want some news? Well, I mean, we've
Dr.
covered a lot of this.
Nandipha and Thabo Bester, like that's it.
Yeah.
That's the news.
Yeah, it's certainly the only story that is gripping South Africa at the moment, and cool. Like, as long as we can give, due attention to some of the other things that are going on, because there are other stories. I mean, this is interesting. The city of Johannesburg has decided to hand over taxi ranks to operators, and they're going to shelter their families. Like, these taxi ranks need to be. They are such dens of iniquity, and I feel so sorry for the people who have to use them every day, because it is not safe there. There is no way you can tell me this is just a friendly place where people are trading and community gets together and all this shit. We all know taxi ranks are all of those things, but they're also
what does that mean?
Nests of very dangerous things, for God's sake, because people know wherever people congregate in numbers, there are going to be crooks. People have their stuff stolen off of them. They get abused. Women get raped in these places. We know these are stories that we can hear every single day on the news if we're just prepared to find them. So,
but what does that mean? They're going to be handed over to operators.
So they're going to think about handing the taxi ranks to industry leaders following calls by the taxi industry. So the Joburg MMC, Kenny Kuningier, right? He said during a signing of a protocol document between the taxi industry and the city that they are going to get together. They're going to decide what to do to clean up the taxi ranks. He said there's a lot of violence and turf wars that are going on. He admits that he has his work cut out for him, but this is the beginning of a conversation, he says, where there will be regular consultations on programs to grow the industry, resolving disputes over routes, managing what the city of Joburg described as an oversubscription of taxis. While the agreement is not legally binding, it paves the way for the industry. So basically, it's talk about doing something.
Yada.
But they are yada-yadaing, which is more than Kenny Kuningier has been doing for a while. He's still trying to find the mini bar, remember, in his office up to a short while. So thank goodness he's at least moved on to talking to people in the transport business. That's with Kenny Kuningier, please.
You know what else was in my Kuningi files? Because we spoke about it a little bit last week about the coalition of the corrupt and the Rainbow Coalition after what's his name from the DA came out to say that's the only way that we're going to be able to beat the ANC, talking about coalitions in 2024. Well, yesterday's big news is in the coalition of the corrupt was a whole lot of, I don't know, they decided a whole lot of people were in the coalition of the corrupt, including the Patriotic Alliance. But yesterday, for some reason, the Patriotic Alliance has shifted from the corrupt side of the equation into the rainbow side of the equation. So that is going to be interesting to watch. Can you see Gog Helen and Gayton McKenzie on the same side of the table in any of these negotiations that are going on behind the scenes.
You must never rule anything out in this crazy country of ours because it's
This is
entirely.
Kedukunene.
I just feel, I really feel like the Patriotic Alliance, I don't know what they stand for because they say a lot of very populist things, but, it's fine to make coalitions, but we need, it's like, for example, when people say diversity is wonderful, diversity is our strength. That's even in our motto as a Republic of South Africa. And that is just not empirically true unless your values are aligned. If your values are aligned, if you're all working towards the same goal, diversity is magnificently helpful because you bring in different points of view and people's different experiences and their different backgrounds and all of their different thoughts. And you can really build something cohesive and strong, and you can move forward in tandem. You can all grab hands and move forward in the right direction. But if it's just diversity for diversity's sake, it is atomizing. It splits everything into individualistic imperatives, and suddenly it doesn't make sense. So if the Patriotic Alliance and the DA and the IFP and the Freedom Front and ACDP and all of these little parties get together and they have...
ACDP has declined.
Okay, well, oh no, what are they going to... Anyway, I mean... don't tell me COPE have also declined. What will we do without COPE?
No, COPE is in the coalition of the corrupt. They're on the corrupt side of the equation. You must keep up.
If these people are going to, if they're going to share values and they've got a common goal, let's say the common goal is to get rid of corruption. I mean, that's a big, hairy, audacious goal, but let's say that's it. Then their diversity of views and opinions is welcome. But if the shared goal is just to gain power, I don't see it working. Like a marriage where you stay together because you think it's good for the kids, but the kid is 5 and you have at least 15 years still ahead of you of pretending to care about each other. It's not going to work.
We're gonna the big meeting is on Saturday, I think. So we'll talk about it next week. Let's file it. Let's put it in file 13 till next week. We'll see what the shared values are on Saturday when they have their big meeting. John Steenhuisen is convening it.
You're more excited about this than I am. To be perfectly honest, I forgot about it. I totally forgot about it. Anyway, criticism is not hate. Powerful. Well, I think it's kind of obvious, but okay. Dragon meat slaps different in Oh, this is great. Ted de Boer says load shedding stage 6 and the Minister of Energy, or Electricity as he is now, is wearing a 2 million Patek on his wrist. Let's audit him first. These pylons that fell down in
Pretoria, yes.
Suddenly made me think, I wonder how much other scrap metal's already been harvested off the pylons across this country that we haven't even noticed. Now I drive past all these pylons. I was doing it yesterday and I was looking at the supports and seeing if some of them have been stolen and so on. And it's amazing. I mean, street poles have been cut down all over our cities, and people
traffic
are just
lights here in Joburg. People
I know. There were no traffic lights at Marlborough yesterday. All of them are gone. All of the Marlborough under the bridge, all the traffic lights are gone. The lot. Someone went there during the night and took all of it away for scrap metal and wires. This is, if the Minister of Electricity has any job at all, this should be it. Stop the harvesting of scrap metal. It is going to cause way more infrastructural problems down the line than the power plants that aren't working. Power plants, you can at least, you can monitor, you can manage, you can put a perimeter around them. What nonsense is this? I mean, I'm really genuinely concerned that nobody's looking at this. There are going to be places where, like, 10 pylons they'll fall on houses. Can you imagine what could happen?
Oh,
Anyway, that's something to think about. Snipe says more news. Truck drivers are sticking on the 30th. So buy all your essentials because they have about 6
striking.
Striking. Sorry, striking. Okay, so
What are
that's
they
the
sticking to?
end of the month. Hey, so we've got another
2
strike
weeks.
coming up. How great. Awesome. Years ago, I heard a conversation between diplomats that the world has known how corrupt this country is and what's been going on for years. Nothing, no, says Rebellious Ruth. Well, I hear all kinds of stories about, this one's in with that one, and it'll all come out eventually, but it may be too late and we may all be dead.
Well, tonight is episode 4 of the Al Jazeera. It's the last episode of the Gold Mafia Al Jazeera Investigates series that we spoke a little bit about it last week as well. And apparently tonight they are naming politicians because they started out in Zimbabwe talking
Good.
about those politicians and all of the people involved there. Then they expanded on how the tie, episode 2 was the expansion on the tie between South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Dubai. Episode 3 was about how it works in Dubai. And I think today's episode is about how it works here at home.
Well, I'm in because you've got me in on this one. I can't now avoid it. We even spoke to Musi Maimane about it on Thursday last week. Phumi,
Yeah.
there's someone else I want to quickly talk about before we get to the burning platform, because I know you've been interested in the story of Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes. So Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos, she was just basically a con artist of the highest order. And people fell for her. Hook, line, and sinker. She had this health company, and they were going to do a test on you and pick up
a drop of blood.
And they'd be able to tell if you'd get cancer at age 75, and amazing stuff, supposedly. Anyway, she's got to go to prison at the end of the month after losing a bid to retain her freedom while she appeals against her convictions. She was sentenced to over 11 years in prison for defrauding investors in her blood testing startup. Federal judge on Monday said Holmes failed to prove her appeals process would lead to a reversal of her case. She is scheduled to go to prison at the end of April. She said she would raise substantial questions that could warrant a new trial. Her attorneys also argued that she should remain free to care for her 2 young children, including one who was born this year. So you're a crook, but you have children. Yeah.
What? I did not know about this child.
2 kids. She's got 2 kids.
No, yeah, the other one we know about, but a new one. I didn't know she was pregnant throughout the. Continue.
But I don't see how special conditions need to be arranged. Her lawyer's obviously just trying to fight for her, but well, you're a crook. You're a crook. You've been sentenced to 11 years. Go to jail. Go.
I have questions. Now you're sending me down a rabbit hole. I'm going to have to leave here this morning and spend time kind of reading up about this Elizabeth Holmes and this child, because who has a child with, do you know what the nutcase that woman is? Whose child is this? Like we all.
Good.
Well,
you know why? Because you're always giving me homework. Now it's your turn. I don't feel bad. Yeah, go and do some homework. All right. Just quickly, you said to me, content is going to end the human race like an asteroid ended the dinosaurs. Do you mean with Kuningi? It's too much.
Yeah, Bona. We're gonna. They are gonna be like historians and archaeologists 1,000 years, like 10,000 years from now, kind of trying to figure out what happened to humanity around 2025. And it's going to be content. Like all these crazy videos of all these young people doing stupid things for content, right? Driving with one hand and taking a video with the other, and the car crashes you see. Them like pulling off insane stunts, the fights, you see them like setting up their cameras so they can get into fights. And my worst one is when they run like these tricks on old people. I saw one with like this grandfather watching TV, but it's like a scary little video, and then the kid jumps out. The TV goes black, and the kid jumps out from behind the TV, dressed like the clown that was in the TV, and the old man is basically having a heart attack. I'm like, this is going to end us. Content is going to end humanity.
I think it will. A lot of people are not capable of controlling their intake, right? So it's like food or drugs or drink or whatever. Too much content will kill you. I think it's going to.
Like the creation of content, the whole Dr. Nandipha Thabo Bester whole thing kind of also came to a head because of the content, right? All of the things that she was doing was for the content she was creating. The content is going to kill us.
Wow. Nick says in the comments, Taiwan overtaxed us this past year, so they're giving the excess back this month.
Really?
Imagine that. You see, that makes sense to me. If government takes in tax like our revenue service has, and they exceed expectations, they bring in more money than they did the previous time and more money than they thought they would, they should give whatever it is back. They should actually take whatever is, the budget is X amount of money. We've brought in this much more. We're going to give you back whatever's left proportionally. Just divide it up. Give if it's 5 rand, it'll be something.
So it's not even like, oh, I want to know more about this Taiwan giving tax back. So it's not even like that SARS is supposed to do with your tax return, where sometimes there's money due to you instead of due by you. It's just everybody's getting a blanket check.
I think so. I mean, it would make sense. It's a very well organized system there. It's not, it's an island. It's an island, and I suppose everybody's more or less compliant, and they've brought in more money than they needed, so they're giving some of it back, which would make sense. Why would you let the government keep money that they're not entitled to? That money is not for them to then decide they're going to save up. It actually belongs to the people who paid their tax and are paying too much tax, clearly. Because if there's an excess, it means we're paying too much. We should pay only exactly the amount of tax that is required by the government to do the very basic things it is required to do. Anything more than that is theft.
Oof. That is nice. 3,000 rand per person.
Wow.
What?
That's what Nick says. You could draw from selected ATMs.
Nice.
Good.
Nice.
Good.
Just use it wisely, Nick. Use it wisely.
Very good. All right. It is 7:00. When we come back, it's the Burning Platform. We're going to be joined by Kanthan this morning, who's always on fire. And we will talk to Raf Gangat, who's someone who's been on the show before. I've interviewed Rafik. He was a former vice consul in Beverly Hills in LA. He became the spokesperson for the Department of Foreign Affairs. He served in Karachi as consul general. He quit the diplomatic service after that to become ambassador. He was ambassador in Palestine in 2003. He established a radio station there. And he was involved in a bunch of other things. So he works as a communications and media consultant in Jerusalem now, and is a very interesting guy to talk to. So he'll be joining us in the Burning Platform next. Some interesting guests that we're trying to bring you from all over the world. And Phumi and I will tell you a little bit about Uncancelled, which is happening tonight. Stick around for that and a whole lot more.
Every time you listen to that 80s show, Tom Cruise lives another 10 years. Every Friday on CliffCentral.com, Paolo and Dory review movies, reminisce about old songs, remember childhood places that are now car parks, and say some outrageously rude things about Patrick Swayze's brother. That 80s show, new episode every Friday, live or as a podcast on CliffCentral.com.
This week on the Auto Trader podcast.
What do you think is best between petrol and diesel? Very, very, very simple question. With the most broad answer, or potential answers. But in your opinion,
so
what's better?
So, diesel is the most efficient fuel.
Yeah.
In terms of burning it in a vehicle, right? Yeah. It's to my understanding more energy dense than petrol.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Catch us every Monday at 9 a.m. on YouTube and on autotrader.co.za.
Okay. All right. I hear Kanthan making some noise in the background.
He's just getting onto his machine. He's almost ready. I love that little avatar of yours, your little icon avatar, Gareth.
Oh, you do? This one?
Yeah.
It's just, I don't even know how it got on there. It's like, I think it's my Apple, you on your Apple ID, it gives you this avatar thing that you can make. And I don't know how it transferred to this thing, but it's somehow there. You know how sometimes you don't know like how technology is operating in the background, but it just does.
And it just does. I don't know how years ago when Kanego was much smaller, he changed my email, my Gmail or Apple iCloud to say, Kanego Mashego, I think it must be Josh. I change it every 6 months. And then I just get an email from a random person saying, who's Josh?
Oh my God, it makes you seem like you're schizophrenic.
I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, but that's the story of my life. And we're on.
Relene wants to talk about pit bulls. So Relene, I'm going to ask you if you can just hold that thought, because we don't have time now on the burning platform, and we do want to keep it to current affairs. Pit bulls can come in later, and then I'll give you the number and we can talk about that later. But I do see you on the comments, and I will give you the number, but we can't do that today. So you'll just have to wait.
Here's a developing story that was in the Herald. Speaking of dogs, that was in the Herald, which has a little bit of a political slant because it involves Andile Lungisa and 2 missing dogs.
What happened?
3 years these dogs were missing, and Andile Lungisa is embroiled in this scandal that's unfolding out there. And it was in the Herald yesterday.
Oh, wow.
No, I don't know if he shipped the dogs to China, but the dogs are back with their owner, a Weimaraner, and I think the second one was a pit bull.
Weimaraners are not inexpensive, guys. You know?
I know this, but
that's
very
expensive. So, Kanthan, how the hell are you?
I'm fit and fabulous, guys. Good to see you all looking so bright and chirpy. Gareth, you look all huddled up almost as though it's winter.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm extremely sensitive to winter. It's why I think I praise my ancestors every day for coming to a sunnier place.
Here we are.
All right. So let's get into some things, guys, before Rafiq joins us, because there's a lot to catch up on here. Just in this week, we've seen Parliament, and Phumi and I touched on this a little bit earlier. When they want to do something, when there's enough media pressure and when there's enough public pressure, like this Thabo Bester situation, can I just say that it's impressive to see how Parliament can quickly call a subcommittee and they can start an investigation and they can subpoena people,
visit the prison,
summons them,
On-site visit.
Yeah. They can
Guys, you're being distracted again. I mean, as far as we are aware, in the entire history of these corrupt bastards running the prison system, there are 3 people that we know that have actually escaped. All right, so there's only 3 people. Yeah, there's only 3 people that we know of during this entire time. So I would say that that's a fairly good success record.
I think
Parliament is very happy to get together whenever the private sector does anything wrong. But at the point at which Parliament needs to turn its scrutiny upon itself, and you guys made exactly the point this morning. Where the fuck is the lifestyle audit for our Minister of Electricity wearing a 2 million rand watch on his wrist? Guys, why are we being distracted?
Or as I said to Phumi, why is the Department of Correctional Services so defunct and so useless and so incompetent that they have to hire at great cost these private companies? And then we blame the private companies when there's no oversight.
Why do police stations have ADT subscriptions?
Right. It is absolutely perverse.
The lunatics are running the asylum, guys. It's been the case for a while.
So do you have a comment on what Phumi asked me earlier? Because she's very well, she's very interested in this coalition of the corrupt versus the the ANC, the DA, whoever they are, the Rainbow Coalition that John Steenhuisen is trying to build here. And I know we touched on this last week already, but now the Patriotic Alliance are going from this side to this side, and it all seems to me like it's just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. And I don't see the Patriotic Alliance's deck chair as being a particularly significant one.
Remember, we touched on this when we had Helen in the studio with us. And one of the points that I raised at the time, we need to work towards actually formalizing coalition structures. And from my perspective, the way in which you formalize coalition structures is you have agreements that are financially binding so that if a party breaks it, there's actually a real cost on a personal basis to the individuals. And I think that that's actually something important that we need to be doing. But Gareth, I also agree with you that it's rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic because, again, none of them are addressing the most basic thing, is how to get people out to vote for any of the people who are part of the coalition of the corrupt. And if we don't get those 11 million people mobilized to the polls, it's not going to make a difference because you are going to have the ANC and the EFF still pulling more than 50% in most of the country.
And Panyaza Lusufi has finally come out and actually said that that's what they're working on.
Oh, that racist bastard. Yeah, okay, that's fine. I called him out on that.
But
he only goes after Afrikaans schools. That's why I say he's a racist bastard. Let him sue me.
Okay. All right. Well, you see Kanthan putting it all on the block this morning. There's no quiet and considered moment with you. It's all like fire, non-stop.
Okay, so while we're waiting for Rafiq, so can I give you guys my hot take?
Yes, go on.
Okay, so, I've got this whole thing of, I always go back and revisit my initial premise, right? Because Gareth and Phumi, I think, one of the things that we need to do as human beings is we need to actually be constantly saying, what if I was wrong in this entire process? Okay, and so for the longest time, I've bought into the entire narrative around state capture that originated with Julie Madonsela's State of Capture report, and for the past several years, we've been down this rabbit hole of the Zondo Commission, which Phumi quite meticulously documented for us over that entire period, and all of this culminated in the mess that resulted in the Guptas not getting extradited. And everyone was trying to point fingers at the diplomatic corps. But my fundamental point was, what if we have not actually been able to show a case against the Guptas? And I now go back and I look through all of the reporting that we've actually had at the time. And remember, one of the most crucial things that we've got here is that the Guptas unduly profited. But remember that unduly profiting in of itself is not a crime. okay, particularly when you have people in government who have actually facilitated those deals. It's a question of getting jobs for pals. And so we've spent these past years, kind of waiting expectantly on the sidelines for something to actually drop, because we've been told that these guys are corrupt bastards and that they need to go to jail. But what at the end of the day, when presented to the judicial authorities in the UAE, it actually turns out that there's not enough to actually justify an extradition. So that's my hot take. So I now go back and take a look at the issues that were in place around when Jacob Zuma was around. Okay, so did he put an end to load shedding? Yes, he did put an end to load shedding. All right, so that's the most crucial piece of the puzzle that I want to highlight. Okay. So what then if the entire state of capture report and the entire judicial process out there was just simply a color revolution that was actually fostered by the people who fund Cyril Ramaphosa? And I'm not going to point fingers at any particular country funding him, but it was US dollars that was found in his mattress, not rubles. All right. And we've had a country since then that has degenerated into chaos, that has been pushing fundamentally a woke agenda from the highest echelons of power in the country. And look, in terms of the amount of money that's being poured down this rabbit hole of renewables, and you look at the people who are involved in there, and guys, I think this is the most fundamental level of state capture, but we've been distracted. So that's my current thought process. I'm not nailing my colors to that mast yet. I've got to do a lot more research into this, but that's where my thought process is going right now.
This is quite a bomb you're dropping. I mean, this is extraordinary stuff. You're questioning the state capture narrative.
A narrative which I bought into, guys, and I think I think all of us bought into it.
Oh, well, we were sold at footstewards, and it seemed like a great scapegoat.
Yep.
But as you know, I was never a fan to begin with when Cyril was touted as the big change that we needed and the savior and the silver bullet to it all. But I do think that there are many components to what we were sold with what the state capture, not just the report, but also all of the various pieces of this puzzle. Gareth, you had my very good friend on one of your shows, Mathangoye, who was at PRASA, and she talks about all of the malicious things that have happened there and continue to happen, right? And those components, and we saw what happened with Denal and the falling apart of that. We saw what happened, so it's not just one big thing. It's many small things. And I think one of the things that has been the greatest injustice over the past couple of years is not being able to bring not a single person to book, and therefore not stopped any of the maliciousness that has been happening behind the scenes. It is not a fabrication that various components of our country, the infrastructure is falling apart because it is not being properly maintained, because somebody is eating the money. That is not a fabrication, nor is it some kind of bogeyman that was there to get rid of some person and put in other people. And it has been continuing. In fact, it's gotten worse in the time that we now have the silver bullet called Cyril Ramaphosa.
That's all the proof you need, is that the people who say state capture was a thing, a Zuma thing, for the Zuma years, they can't account for why it's still going on, right? Because if supposedly all those people, the whole coterie around Jacob Zuma were the problem, and again, Cyril has some tough explaining to do about how he was part of that as well. But if they were the problem and they are now out of power, how come the corruption and money laundering and fraud continues?
It has gotten worse, if anything, So a couple of days ago, I don't know if you saw the videos of Thabo Mbeki's motorcade after being, after his big open letter to not the Secretary General, but to the now Deputy President of the party, and decrying the state at which the ANC is, and how it's fallen out of lockstep with the people and no longer serves the people, yada yada yada, right? So now they ghosted him for 3 weeks. And a couple of days ago, there was videos of him arriving, and they did put out a statement actually from the Secretary General's office saying that they have had a very collegial and fruitful engagement with the former president with regard to changing what is happening within the party. And what's the magic word? Renewal of the party. So that it can become.
I'm going to have to park all these questions for a moment, and it's going to leave lots of people feeling dissatisfied, because we could talk about this some more, and maybe we will with our guest. But I want to introduce Raf Gangat, who's been a guest on my show before. He is a philosopher, a cricketer, a music impresario, a broadcaster, a writer, and was the first ever career diplomat of color for South Africa all those years ago. He served as a vice consul in America, became a spokesperson for the Department of Foreign Affairs. He was in Karachi as our consul general, ambassador to the United Arab Emirates. He was also ambassador to Palestine and lives in Israel now, in Jerusalem. He is our guest this morning. And Raf, it's good to see you. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. It's lovely to see all you guys. I'm here. I'm listening to what you guys are talking about, what's happening in my beloved country, and all I can say is cry the beloved country.
Well, let's hope that we can get more than tears out of you this morning. So you've got a few things that I think might be very interesting to South Africa, because we are constantly told in the mainstream media about the situation in Israel, in Palestine, in the Middle East. We're given probably only a few versions of the story, which is always complicated because there are many. And this part of the world continues to fascinate all of us. In some people's minds, it's now boring because it's been going on for so long. But tell us what's been going on with these protests in Israel over judicial reform. And maybe you can explain to people in South Africa who don't know why it is that so many people took to the streets to complain about Netanyahu's desire to reform the judiciary.
Okay, we had lots of issues about elections and different formations and different governments forming. What finally happened was the last elections, Netanyahu formed a coalition with the extreme right. And that just pissed off a lot of people on the center and so-called left. And what he intended to do was, okay, the first thing he did was he brought in members of the extreme right. He brought in somebody like Ben Gvir, who is, I don't know if there's a South African equivalent, and he promised him his own little militia. And then he brought in another extreme right guy called Smonich, and he gave him the finance ministry and the settlements. So the majority of, I would say, people from the Tel Aviv area got upset about this. And then they went about with this whole judicial reform story, whereby they want to reform the judiciary, where the legislative sector of government would now appoint the judges. So basically, the checks and balances are gone. And that's the whole issue. It's about checks and balances. Previously in Israel, you've had a president going to prison for rape. You've had a prime minister going to prison for fraud. It's democracy in action. It works. If you talk about Israel and Israel's democracy, yes, for the Israelis, it's a democracy. Talking about the West Bank and the Palestinians, that's another story. We won't get into that right now. So it's a democracy, it's a fact. And now this government headed by Netanyahu wants to change all this, wants to appoint judges, and wants to change the whole judiciary system. And that's where you got all in very simple terms, that's where the demonstrations are taking place and people don't want it. And he's held back. We've had the Passover holidays, and he's promised his side, the right wing, that after the Passover holidays, we'll continue with it. Meanwhile, he's bought time. But even if he's bought time, the demonstrations are continuing. People are not going to give in. I hope that answers it.
Rafik, interesting reports that were floating around yesterday that shows that Mossad was actually implicated in organizing a lot of the riots that took place. I don't know if you guys have heard anything about that in that part of the world.
Yeah, we've heard about that. And in fact, what has been happening is that people from the side of the military, the generals, previous generals, the military, the pilots, everybody's been involved in this. And now it wasn't, we're not surprised to hear that Mossad has been involved in this as well. I'm trying to simplify this, all right? It's seculars versus the religious right. And most of the people, the intellectuals, the people who really run the country, the intellectual right, are fighting the seculars. The intellectual rights are fighting the extreme right, and it's going to get worse.
Rafik, I have a question about talking about the people that run the country and what we are seeing over here, just in terms of the sheer numbers of people that are involved in all of these protests out in the street, is how does a Netanyahu rise to the position if so many people, in a democracy that works, if so many people are against what he stands for? How did he get the position if so many people are against him?
But you know the answer yourself already, Phumi. It's a coalition of the corrupt. You know this. You spoke about it earlier on.
No, really, because and this is something that particularly interests me here in South Africa, because we hear lots of people say particular things, but when it comes to showing up on the polls, people are not showing up in the way that they speak out in. Is that the same thing that happens?
Okay, in terms of the recent polls, his popularity has plummeted. If you have elections tomorrow, he's gone. But he has a coalition that's holding together for now, and he's a damn good politician. He knew everything was on the line. He held back until after the Passover holidays, and he's got the president involved now to speak to everyone and form some kind of compromise, right? He's a damn good politician, and he's a survivor.
Mobilizing everyone to stay out of prison.
Exactly.
And
sorry.
Rafik, I also noticed that, whenever it hits the fan for politicians in Israel, the first thing that they do is go after Palestine.
It brings them all together.
Yes, but are we ever going to get to the stage where people in Israel, and look, particularly in Tel Aviv, because I'd also like you to touch on, because I'm sensing that there's kind of an urban-rural divide, so to speak, that's kind of happening right now, with Tel Aviv being strongly opposed to a lot of the stuff that Netanyahu has been doing, but the larger country, perhaps being more conservative, taking a different view on it. But surely this thing about using the bombing of Palestinians as a distraction whenever there's political turmoil, how do we get to the point where eventually people say, no, we actually want to, put that aside and focus on the real stuff that's going on? Because I have a sense that it's almost at the point where you can get Israelis to start saying enough is enough on that.
Yeah, it happened this time around. The bombing of the Palestinians happened, and everybody expected there will be, both factions would unite and come together. But it didn't happen. Last Saturday we had demonstrations once more. The demonstrations are continuing, bombing or no bombing. They're just adamant on that side. And you're right, it's a rural versus, it's the settlers. Netanyahu has brought the settlers on his side and the extreme right settlers, and it's the urban, Tel Aviv crowd, and for the big cities as well. So we have a clash. We have a big clash, but the Tel Aviv crowd is not giving. They're not giving in.
In the interests of pursuing that clash further in the show, I'm a big Netanyahu fan, and I I know that that's not going to make me the majority on this show, but I also I can't help but notice the terminology difference, Raf, between the way you explain the extreme right and the so-called left. It seems to me that you bring your own bias to bear here, and I always find that extremely interesting. Do you want to explain why you think there's only a so-called left, but there's an extreme right?
There is no left. I mean, if you, I mean,
really?
the left in Israel is gone, right? It's completely. I mean, Meretz and all the left-wing parties are gone. And if Netanyahu calls anyone who opposes him left, and the people who really oppose him are not really left. I mean, they're centrists or on the right. And
There's
we have.
There's nothing of the left. Okay.
Yeah, there's nothing left of the left.
These new ideas, not just in Israel, all over the world.
He's a very clever politician. All right, I do want to hear, because we seldom get an objective point of view. I know that you keep up to date with South Africa and the news that you obviously read about us. What do people say about South Africa in Israel?
We read about, I mean, I get up every morning and I read the news and I get depressed every morning. I mean, I worked in government. I was a diplomat. Okay, I mean, Kanthan just spoke earlier about what's happening with the Guptas and all of that stuff. I was an ambassador in Abu Dhabi. I was the first South African diplomat. I set up the whole thing in Abu Dhabi. And I think, immediately when I read that, and then people from South Africa called me and said, what's your take on this? And I said, I smell a rat, right? Let's be frank. I was an ambassador there. I know how the whole system works there. The ambassador has a special relationship with the royal family. The royal family runs the show. And if you want anything done, you don't work through the system. You go to the royal family and you talk to the royal family, and the royal family just facilitates things. It's not a democracy. It's a family business, And when I needed anything to be done, I didn't go to this ministry or that ministry. I went right to the top and got things done. So if I was the ambassador there, I would go right to the top and say, we need this to be done, and it gets done. So I don't know what happened. And I remember at one stage, I mean, there was talk about, there's time spent, we have to translate the Arabic and all that kind of stuff. Come on, the embassy has a full-time translator. The embassy has a full-time they have a full-time translator who's paid by the South African taxpayer, who works full-time to do immediate translations. Come on. Right from the beginning, I mean, this was not right. So, I mean, I smell a rat. I can't point a finger. What I can say, I mean, this is just supposition that if the Guptas come back to South Africa, they can spill the beans on a lot of people. So it's better they just stay in Dubai. I don't know if Kanthan agrees with that.
Oh, they're not in Dubai anymore. They're now the citizens of, what is that?
Vanuatu.
Oh, Vanuatu, yeah.
Oh, right.
Lovely stuff.
Which has no extradition treaties with South Africa.
A little island nation. Very interesting.
They probably own the island with all the money they left with.
Yeah, probably. It's a hell of a story. So Raf, when you come to this thing about the diplomatic core and how it works, I mean, you probably still have friends who work in what do we call the DIRCO, the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. I've got a friend who's there, and she tells me it's all really running very nicely. Nandipha Pandor is an excellent minister. They've got their priorities right. They're involving themselves in the conversations that will benefit South Africa from a trade point of view and from the people we align ourselves with internationally. Was there a kind of coordination in your day that you don't see there now, or am I being super critical just because this is the time that we're in and I'm paying attention?
Okay, I left the diplomatic corps a long time ago, and one of the reasons I left, I mean, it's a long story, is what really started happening was we had professionals, and then all these cadres came in, with no knowledge whatsoever. Somebody held a gun somewhere or somebody did something, and suddenly this guy is placed above me as a boss, and he doesn't know anything. And it's this whole cadre appointments that just really got me upset with the diplomatic corps at that stage. And I had my personal issues with a lot of people, and finally I resigned. But I've followed a lot since then. Yes, I mean, Naledi Pandey is far better than what we've had previously, right? I mean, she's really, I mean,
Kwana Mashabane, yeah, she was
yeah,
terrific.
yeah. I mean, I worked with her at one stage. I can write a book about that. But anyway, Naledi is pretty good, and I think we have some really good, I mean, people out there. But generally, the diplomatic corps that I knew, that I worked in, the professionals that I worked with, I don't see that anymore. There's just been a general decline.
Holmes, you wanted to ask something?
Well, just talking about the professionalism and then having all of these cadres and the politicians in place. One of the things that I'm quite interested in as a South African now living in Israel, there's quite a lot of talk here at home, and Naledi is one of the big proponents of this, of the Palestinian apartheid state and South Africa's role in kind of ostracizing, and I mean they downgraded the embassy in Israel at some point, and the tensions that comes with sitting in Israel, looking back here at home. How is South Africa perceived politically where you are?
I mean, South Africa punches above its weight, when it comes to this issue. I mean, in the days of Madiba, yes, South Africa had the moral authority to, punch above its weight, but today it can't. And this whole thing about downgrading the embassy in Tel Aviv, I have issues with that. Countries in the apartheid era, countries that were very anti-South Africa and pro-ANC, they still maintained embassies in South Africa. They had ambassadors in South Africa, and that's the way you engage with the country. You don't walk away. You don't take your ambassador out of the country. You keep your ambassador there. You engage with the country. That's what diplomacy is all about. And I think removing the ambassador, I mean, does it make any difference to Israel? South Africa is a puny little country as far as Israel is concerned. And does it, in fact, is we shooting ourselves in the foot by doing that? But by having an ambassador, if something happens, the ambassador can then go up to the highest levels, make his concerns, I mean, felt, and convey the messages from one government to another government, and stuff like that. I don't know. I think it was very short-sighted and very foolish. That's my personal opinion. I'm no longer a diplomat, but but having been a diplomat, and I've seen, I mean, even in the worst days of apartheid, countries in the forefront of the struggle outside maintained embassies and ambassadors, and they always were there to condemn, criticize, and so forth.
Yeah. Look, Kanthan, you want to say something?
No, I was going to say that Rafik, you've got a really unique insights, and that you've got this very strong background in diplomacy, and you literally in the heart of the conflict zone, so to speak. And I think that maybe if you can do just a bit of reading the tea leaves for us, against the backdrop of, so we spoke about the protests that are happening. There's the invasion of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which was unprecedented, and now these airstrikes against Syria. But you've also got reports coming out this week that Iran's on the brink of acquisition of nukes. You've got the Chinese now turning around and saying that there has to be a formalization of a two-state solution that's happening between Israel and Palestine. You've got very clear evidence that the Biden regime is very firmly against the Netanyahu regime and has been agitating stuff behind the scenes. And you've got this entire global shift that's happening in terms of people moving across onto the BRIC side. So read the tea leaves for me, just in terms of what's happening right now, particularly with the Israel-Palestine situation. Is this going to be better? Is this going to be just ramping up of the current conflict? What's actually, where do you see this going?
It's a loaded question. It requires a lot of I wish I could do a TikTok less than a minute kind of thing. Okay. The question you pose, that's the next book I'm working on. I'm writing this book, Is Israel an Apartheid State? I have a unique insight. I came here as a diplomat 20 years ago, and I sat on the ring side, on the Palestinian side of the ring. And what's the conflict on the Palestinian side? Thereafter, I got into the ring and I became a talk show host on the only political talk show in English between the two sides. And it was a unique talk show host in that sense that, being a South African, if I had an Israeli guest, I would sit in the studio in Jerusalem. If I had a Palestinian guest, I would sit in the studio in Ramallah. And for the first time, Israeli politicians and Palestinian politicians, through me, were being questioned by Israelis and Palestinians in a neutral language, English. That's the story of my book, Music Has No Boundaries. Today, I sit as an objective observer right in the back, and I watch the whole thing. So I've had three different viewpoints on what's been happening here. And the point that you raised, looking at the tea leaves, if I can go back to the South African experience, apartheid ended because of the Berlin Wall coming down. That's the way I see it. With whatever was happening, when the Berlin Wall came down, it had a whole effect, and that saw the beginning of the end of apartheid. And now you're seeing the de-dollarization process. America is no longer this unipower. You have this multipolar world emerging with Russia, China, Iran playing a role now. Saudi Arabia is now being to get out the clutch holds of the American thing. And you've seen these leaks now, the Pentagon leaks, that the United Arab Emirates is cozying up to Russia. All these things are happening, and America is losing its grip on the whole world. And with this happening, you're going to see a domino effect everywhere in the world, including this part of the world too. I can't predict what's going to happen, but things are going to start happening. Does that answer your question?
Well, I think it pretty much ties in with where my thinking has been going on this. Like you have been trying to take a kind of rear view in terms of this. I don't generally buy into the narrative that Israel's an apartheid state, because that labeling things is just kind of sloppy from my perspective. It doesn't allow you the opportunity to actually inject nuance into a conversation. And the fascinating thing for me are, the diplomatic back channels that you've touched on to some extent. Those back channels between Israel and Russia are very strong, and they always have been. And the fact is that Putin actually has a direct line to Netanyahu on his desk, and is one of the few people in the world that he will actually take a call from. At the same time, you've got this very strong relationship now between Russia and Iran. You've got China throwing its hat into the ring as well. And at the same time, you've got the Biden administration very anxious to have a regime change in Israel. And so it's a bit of a mess for me. But I suppose what I'm looking for is a sign of hope that there can actually be some sort of an end to the bombing would be nice. I'd really like to see an end to the rockets flying between both territories, and someone actually now trying to step in and actually trying to broker a peace deal. And I think with the US actually having a waning star, I'm hopeful that's going to happen, but I'm not seeing a pathway to getting there. Gareth, you have that wry smile on your face, the Netanyahu fan.
Who would it be? Who would referee this if not the United States? I mean, clearly, the Palestinians have had their problems with the United States in the past.
Look, if China can bring the Iranians and the Saudis together, my word.
Yeah, that's quite an achievement.
Mm.
Well, and if you look at the fact that more and more of all of those countries talk about the back channels, the diplomatic back channels, talking about like their Abraham Accords, and the fact that more and more of them are signing up onto that, you then do quite honestly have a shifting power in that region that is moving towards a working with each other. And then, just to bring it back home to South Africa, where we have a minister who's very emotional about what's happening over there and failing to see and read the tea leaves, to use your earlier analogy, Kanthan, and failing to read the tea leaves, and therefore closing off for a country like ours that has so many problems, an opportunity to reach out and actually win from solutions that live in that region. I mean, we could learn a lot from Israel, not just in terms of what they've been able to do with their country and the country that they've built in the middle of the desert, but also from their technology, from their agriculture. And people who listen to the show know that, I personally have had an experience where we've been able to bring technology that's changed the lives of people here in this country. And here we have a very emotional and small-minded minister, in my view, who is looking at, I don't know, I'm not sure what it is that she's looking at that makes her make the decisions and make the sounds that she makes.
Well, it's all binary to so many people in the ANC. It's either, are you our friend or are you not our friend? Were you our friend in the past or are you still our friend? It's kind of this legacy stuff, which doesn't seem to compute with a world that is constantly changing. I'm curious about the question that Kanthan asked, who the next adjudicator should be, and this leads us on to an interesting discussion, which I think, Raf, you can join in on, because you're also watching the world and how international politics are changing. This BRICS thing seems to be the talk of the town at the moment. We see kind of an effeteness in the Biden regime in terms of trying to tame what is clearly going to become an alternative. How do you feel about BRICS? How do you feel about this new coalition and the fact that it may silently and in a very direct way start harming American interests, in inverted commas, as opposed to the interests of these countries themselves?
It's already happening. I mean, with BRICS, the BRICS countries, China now is trading with Russia. They're moving away from the dollars. I mean, like the other day, I read something about Malaysia and China, trading in their own currencies. The whole BRICS, the BRICS coalition, and moving away from the de-dollarization, it's going to affect America big time. That alone is just one indication. And now you got other countries like Saudi Arabia want to join BRICS, UAE wants to join BRICS. So you have a multipolar world emerging from a unipolar American-dominated world, which is good for the whole world. In fact.
Yeah. All right, Raf, I'm gonna let you go because your connection is breaking up quite badly. And thank you for being on the show this morning. We will check in with you again soon. Appreciate your contribution, and of course, people can find out more. Where can we get hold of you?
Where you got hold of me now.
This is your ad break.
Yeah. There's no social media tag that we can put on.
He doesn't tweet.
There's a website. We'll put it out.
There's a website.
Yeah, I have a website. And I've just published my new book, which is called Music Has No Boundaries. It's a story about what we did. We tried to bring the South African radio experience, the 702 experience, what 702 did in South Africa, to this part of the world. It was an amazing experience, and the experiment that worked for a while, and we got closed down. Some of us went to prison, right? And the whole story is told for the very first time. And from that story comes another story, the first woman radio station in the Arab world, Radio Nisa FM. And it's a story about two radio stations.
Sorry, Raf, it's getting very, very, the connection is breaking up, but we will. Okay. Music Has No Boundaries is the book by Raf Gangat. He will give us the details and we'll put it up on the website, and you can obviously get it over there. But I do want to have us continue this conversation, if you don't mind, Kanthan and Phumi, because I do not think we've completely extinguished the subject of what's going on with this BRICS move. And there have been new developments. I mean, the U.S. Central Bank, the U.S. Federal Reserve, as they call themselves, has started rolling out, as they promised they would in April of 2023. They said they would start to play with the idea of a central digital currency. How do we feel about that, Kanthan?
We could probably devote an entire show talking about this stuff, Gareth, because it's really interesting. Okay, so let me just kind of break down where my thought process is on this right now. Okay, to a large extent, the reason why the US has been able to maintain the outrageous trade deficits that they have, and right now, in terms of the balance of trade, the US is going to top $1 trillion in the next year. They hit 980 something billion in this year, and you see, the only way you can keep doing that as a country is if you do what the US has had the ability to do, which is to print an unlimited number of US dollars. Now, what's been happening, and it's directly as a result of Biden's stupidity of sanctioning Russia, that you've had almost every country in the world saying, well, if the US can actually take my money at any given stage, I really don't want to be keeping my fortunes with the US as a reserve currency. And so they've been moving to gold. We know already that, Russia has been buying a massive amount of gold. China, in addition to being one of the biggest gold producers in the world, has been a net importer of gold. India has surreptitiously bought up most of the world's silver market over the past 4 or 5 years. And you've now got the entry of the likes of the Saudis. No doubt Venezuela is going to be part of that mix as well. You've now got Brazil coming into it as well, and all of them are bringing their own resources to bear at the same time.
What are we bringing if we're the S in BRICS? Because
we're very small S.
No, actually,
because Raf said Saudi Arabia might join. I'm thinking they'll just take our S and we'll just be thrown out.
No, I think people actually forget that if you look at a lot of the materials that the resources that are actually necessary in the world right now, and I've touched on this when people say we shouldn't piss off the US because they're going to cut trade ties with us. No, actually, there's a lot of materials where the US is fundamentally dependent on having us there. Uranium being a case in point. If not for the fact that we're able to be a regular supplier of uranium, the US would be forced to deal with Russia. Now, my view is that we should actually be putting a stranglehold on our uranium exports. We should be beneficiating our uranium exports instead of shipping it off to Westinghouse in the US to get them to process it.
Are we still actively mining uranium in any meaningful way in South Africa?
Well, remember that uranium in the South African context has always been a byproduct of gold mining. Okay, which is why I keep telling people, don't build houses on mine dumps because they're radioactive. So, but my point is that we've had the resources all the time. So it's uranium, it's chrome. Our coal reserves are still absolutely massive. And you can see that by the hundreds upon hundreds of trucks that are lined up to get into Richards Bay and just load up onto ships. So we've still got a massive amount of resources that we can bring to bear. And the idea of actually using those resources to shore up the value of the currency, is going to give us a real stake in BRICS. And I think that almost every country right now that's coming in there. But look, let's just step back to the US dollar scenario, because that becomes the crucial bit. What it means is that in the old days, people were very happy to hold US dollars because, it meant that they would buy oil, for example, in US dollars, and it was the main reason for holding onto the US dollars. And of course, they could then purchase stuff directly from the US as well. But when you no longer have a need to hold US dollars and you start offloading your dollars, those dollars then flow back into the US. And when those dollars flow back into the US, they've really got nowhere to go. So you're doubling the money supply in the US. Because remember, Biden printed $4 trillion during his time. Okay, so he effectively doubled the money supply during his term. Now, if you have that flowing back into the US, okay, if your economy is worth X number of dollars and you double the number of dollars in circulation, then that means that you're halving the value of the dollar in real terms, which is why inflation in the US has been, absolutely going through the roof. So
let me ask you about that quickly. So, hold on, because it almost sounds, and a conspiracy theorist might say, that is sabotage. Why would the U.S. government allow this to happen? Because is it because they didn't see the consequences of these decisions? What's the
Gareth,
story?
you're asking exactly the right question, because this is where my thought process has been going. Okay, because what if the entire process of de-dollarization, the sabotaging of the greenback, has actually been part of an overall plan by the US deep state to suddenly rip out the dollar and replace it with this federal digital currency that effectively is going to be able to track the movements of every individual within the United States. Okay, so you suddenly have a point at which all of the dollars that are in circulation effectively become valueless, because the only way you can get it back into circulation is by legally declaring them and putting them on the table. Now, Modi did something very similar when he came into power in India. You might remember that what he did was he immediately outlawed all notes that had been printed before his tenure. And he said, you have a limited period in which you can bring back this money and deposit it into your bank accounts. Otherwise, it's going to become worthless after a particular date. There were riots and so forth that actually took place at the time. But what it meant was that a lot of printed money that people were holding as cash hoards suddenly got ripped out of circulation kind of almost overnight. It just became worthless pieces of paper. And if you look at all of the talk that's been going on right now in the US, particularly from the likes of Yellen and other people in the Biden administration, of moving towards this centralized digital currency, it does effectively become a way that the US can perform this great reset that they've been talking about. Okay, where, you'll have no wealth and you'll be happy with it.
But part of the reason why the great reset that the US has been talking about, and it's also the reason why we wake up this morning and the former finance minister of Greece, he of the center of Grexit, also says, he wishes they could have had China as a banker too, because the US for many, many years has weaponized their dollar. So whether it is their dollar or it is a central digital currency, the point is that the world is losing faith in what the US does and says, and how that keeps the peace around the world. Just talking of the digital currencies, I mean, a similar thing is what happened in Nigeria just ahead of the elections. They tried to rip out all of the money in circulation and replace it with the digital currency because notoriously, Nigerians buy their elections. Nigerian politicians buy the ballot. So look, I think one of the things that when I look at what's happening, and as you know, I like to bring it all back home to South Africa, is all of those things, all our rich reserves, all of the platinum and the gold and the coal that we have really doesn't give us much of a bargaining power if our politicians are self-serving and stupid, which is what we have to deal with at the moment. They do not see the bigger picture of the politics at play and are emotional about a lot of the decisions that they are making. And that, unfortunately, even with our reserves, puts us in a bad position.
All right. Thank you, Phumi. Thank you, Kanthan. Thank you to everybody who joined us this morning on the Burning Platform, and to Raf Gangat, our guest from earlier. We will catch up again next week, Thursday, for some more of the Burning Platform. And don't forget, tonight we have Uncancelled with Professor Bakeng, which is going to be interesting. Phumi's going to be joining me.
Gareth, you're wrapping up a couple of minutes early, so let me just get
Sorry.
One more thing to say.
No, I want to get one. No, guys, I just want to humbly and unreservedly apologize to Panyaza Lusufi for calling him a racist bastard. I have no idea whether his parents are married. I misspoke, and I apologize unreservedly.
All right, leaving us on a clanger. I love it. Thank you. All right, there we go. That is none other than Kanthan Pillay. And you can find all of us on social media. If you want to send us an email, send it to contact@cliffcentral.com. We will see you tomorrow at 6 a.m.